Please welcome to the stage Director of Product Data Infrastructure at Klaviyo, Alexandra Edelstein.
Hi, everyone. Oh, am I on? All right. It's Edelstein, but I'll cut you guys some slack. Klaviyo. I'm Alexandra Edelstein. I'm a Director of Product at Klaviyo. For those of you that aren't familiar, Klaviyo is a data-driven, multi-channel marketing automation platform. I've been with Klaviyo for about 7 years. Yes, Klaviyo has been around for longer than 7 years. Now I manage all things data infrastructure, which spans our integrations, like things like Shopify, but many others, as well as event processing, data storage, and some back-end systems like our segmentation engine. I'm very happy to be here in Toronto with you all this week. So the topic of my talk here is building use case-driven APIs to extend merchant value. Before I talk about how we approach this initiative, I want to share more on what we actually sought out to do, kind of the why behind the initiative. So Klaviyo's product vision extends well beyond our own application. We built infrastructure designed to process, store, analyze, and act on vast amounts of customer data. But we know that analyzing and acting on data can take many forms. And we also know, as much as we'd like to, we can't build everything for everyone. So we think the next best thing is expanding Klaviyo as an API-first platform to empower developers to tackle brands' own unique challenges, to then solve and in turn unlock value for merchants well beyond Klaviyo's application. So we know that generally becoming more of an API-first platform starts with having some pretty good APIs. For those of you that have worked with our V1, even our V2 APIs, there's a lot lacking. They've served customers and developers alike for a long time, but they weren't really built with usage patterns in mind, and we knew that we could and really needed to do quite a lot better. So at this point, you might be thinking, you said Klaviyo is a data-driven, multi-channel marketing automation platform. Why do you care so much about APIs? And why should maybe all of you care too? Well, we're all here because we're all part of Shopify's robust and growing ecosystem. At Klaviyo, we really believe that creating clean, well-documented service boundaries extends well beyond Shopify's own APIs. Platforms built on top of platforms really creates a whole ecosystem in itself that's better for customers and app developers alike. Customers with advanced use cases will see the ecosystem as open and easily customizable to meet their needs. App developers will feel comfortable that they can easily meet the needs of any customer who buys into the ecosystem and use a myriad of tools within it. So really, it's with all this in mind that Klaviyo thinks, platforms on top of platforms is what we call the ultimate flywheel. The more open and connected we all are within it, the more powerful the flywheel. But also, the more open and integrated you all are, the more sticky you become within it. So it's with all this in mind that Klaviyo's turned such a focus to not only our APIs, but also the developer experience that comes along with them. Okay, so now that we've covered a little bit on the what and the why of this initiative, I want to talk more about the how. Our developer infrastructure team was really thoughtful about how to approach this. We knew we wanted to release new endpoints to enable programmatic access to brand new parts of Klaviyo that weren't exposed before. We also knew that we needed to rewrite all of our existing APIs and create some new API-driven functionality. So we approached this in a principled manner, which is what we tend to do at Klaviyo, and draft a set of guiding principles that would allow us to kind of proceed with velocity while also maintaining the integrity of the process along the way. First, we thought a lot about exposing primitives. Generally, if you can point and click and do something within our UI, we wanted to make that available via API as well. And further, we wanted to make sure that developers could build on those very same primitives to build net new applications. At the same time, we're very use case oriented. And so we wanted to make sure that we're thinking about real workflows of users and developers to support efficient and effective usage patterns through our APIs. Next, I'm a product person, so I won't lie. I think that this next principle is a core principle of any product development, no matter what you're building. But be wary of a problem or a solution without a problem. We wanted to make sure that we really knew what we were solving for, so we can make grounded decisions and truly move towards solutions that were best fit. And lastly, standards, right? Just as when you're thinking about building a graphical user interface, a GUI, consistency is really important. We felt that consistency with APIs would breed predictability, and that would breed efficiency and delight. So with these principles, we knew if we stuck to them, we'd have a fighting chance here of taking on a whole new set of APIs at a company where it's very decentralized in terms of API ownership. So here's the milestones of what this looked like once we started operationalizing this. First, we dove into user research, probably spoke to some of you in the audience, figured out the good, the bad, the ugly when it came to our existing APIs. There was a lot there. We wanted to make sure we really knew the needs of our users and we're being forward-thinking along with them for what the next generation of APIs might look like. Next, internal tooling. I mentioned APIs at Klaviyo are not just owned by one team. Our org structure has teams that are cross-functional, focused on parts of the platform, and each team owns their own APIs. And so we knew that if we're going to do something this large and really redo all of our APIs from the ground up, some internal tooling would be really critical, such as having an open API spec built directly from the code, SDKs built directly from the spec. All these things made it really easy for developers to just focus on their APIs and have the entire V3 set kind of get built around by teams that were focused on that portion. Next, standards, right? Our core principle here around consistency and sticking to it. We knew that would be a little chaotic to try to enforce this without some sort of process to help. So we did form an internal API council that was cross-functional with engineers and product folks from different teams, some folks that have been at Klaviyo for a long time, some folks that were more forward-thinking on the API front, to help create velocity and momentum, even when making tough decisions and ups and downs. Lastly, the fun part, actually creating the specs, building, and iterating. It's the hard part, but it's the fun part. I will add, don't underestimate how hard it can be to find alpha testers, even when you have a lot of API users. This is something that we definitely wish we got ahead on a little bit so that we had more folks that were willing and eager to test our APIs, give us feedback early. We had some teams, like our catalogs team, they built the alpha catalog API, which was much needed and awaited, a while before we even had alpha testers lined up, and it slowed us down a little bit in the early days. So keep in mind what the end-to-end process is going to look like to get people testing, using, giving feedback, so that as you move to the beta, which we're now in, you have that increased confidence with testers along the way. All right, so some of those decisions, right? It wasn't easy along the way to think about what this new generation of APIs were going to look like. We knew that building from scratch, it's always a good opportunity to reevaluate some core tech choices and standards. We knew we'd be versioning these APIs. We wanted to align on those best fit solutions. One key one, right? REST, GraphQL. We knew that on a surface level, GraphQL could solve a lot of the problems that we and developers were having with our RESTful APIs. At the same time, it came with some drawbacks. GraphQL is newer, steeper learning curve for developers, and it doesn't play as nice with HTTP caching. So ultimately, we decided what's the best fit here. We don't just want a solution, doesn't really fit the problem. So we ended up finding that the JSON API specification would allow us to stick with REST, but get a lot of the benefits of more integrated APIs. And so we felt this was the best way forward for us, adhering to those guiding principles. And it's also a really nice transition to the next big challenge we had, which was managing resource relationships. This is something that's a lot easier if you're using GraphQL, where endpoints are more flexible by default. But it was really important for us to improve the efficiency of our APIs. It was a big challenge we had with V1 and V2, making lots of requests and having to really navigate APIs to complete a workflow. And so we wanted to start including more related resources in the object response. But, of course, when you're including more in the response, that can slow down response times. It can also start to get confusing of what a given API is really designed for if suddenly you can get whatever you want from a specific endpoint that has a very specific purpose. And it can obviously put strain on our systems if suddenly people are requesting lots of data and the endpoint isn't optimized for that purpose. So again, this is where the JSON API specification really helped us out. We're able to include more enhanced filtering and sorting, make resources included optional, so ultimately developers could really decide what data they wanted to return and how they did it. And the standardization allowed us to implement some guardrails for our own systems. So really it was kind of the best of both worlds while sticking with a RESTful framework that we felt best mapped to how Klaviyo's infrastructure overall is organized. Lastly, one that may not seem like such a tough decision, but was actually a little controversial initially at Klaviyo, rate limiting. For those of you that worked with our V1 APIs, we didn't have any documented rate limiting. We instead just focused on strengthening our systems. Scale's kind of our thing, so we're like, hey, we can generally handle it. We had some back-end protections, but largely rate limiting was not a big part of the initial APIs that we put out, which we thought was a strength, not so great. Talking to customers and developers, obviously, predictable, well-documented rate limits can make it a lot easier. It's an asset when building a new integration. Obviously, can help protect destructive access patterns, DDoS attacks on our side. So we aligned pretty early on that the next generation of APIs would have very well-documented APIs that are on a per endpoint basis. And we actually have flexibility on an API key basis. So this gives us a lot of flexibility moving forward while providing that predictable pattern so developers will know how to handle rate limits elegantly and, of course, protect Klaviyo systems predictably along the way. OK, so now that we've gotten a little in the weeds a little bit, I want to take a step back again, back to that flywheel. So our vision at Klaviyo, right, it's to be a key player in this flywheel. And we know that that requires more than just shipping some new APIs. Don't worry. We're not thinking we can stop there. And we're not. So kind of the vision is a lot bigger than just APIs. We really want to foster a thriving developer ecosystem that will continue to take advantage of the openness of the broader ecosystem that we're all finding ourselves in. So this means going beyond just building a delightful platform to build on top of, and it includes marketing and sales and discoverability and solving for some of that as well for everyone that is building on top of Klaviyo. So today, you will notice that beyond our APIs, we've also released some fun tools, like some new SDKs in any language. Again, this used to be really tedious for us. I was just chatting with our team earlier. We used to have people that knew Ruby, and then they would leave, and we're like, man, how are we going to manage these SDKs? Now it's all generated automatically in any language, and we just need to test it and review from the Open API spec. And so a lot of internal tooling and automation has made a lot of this possible for us to make it easier for others to build on top of Klaviyo. Sample generation data tool, something that I was really excited to see. If you wanted to get started and test things out in Klaviyo, you'd have to read our APIs, write a bunch of scripts. It took a ton of time to get attributes, events, data into Klaviyo to start playing around. Now, with a couple clicks of a button, that all flows in, and you have a decent volume of data to get started with. But in the future, you can expect to see a lot more from Klaviyo. You can expect to see an app store that helps with not only discoverability for merchants that are looking to leverage this flywheel to drive more value, but also for app developers that are looking for distribution and understanding what it means to actually be part of Klaviyo's ecosystem as part of a broader one as well. For those of you that are thinking, it sounds pretty neat, but where is OAuth, right? Again, APIs are not the start and end here. Into next year, you'll see a lot more investments as milestones on this bigger journey for us, so that when you're building into and on top of Klaviyo, you really feel quite as native as if we're building it ourselves. That's our goal here. So lots more iteration and new things to be coming starting in Q1 and through the rest of next year, helping towards this larger vision. So if you are interested in learning more about what we've launched so far, or to see it all in action. I know these links aren't clickable. Someone yesterday had some really nifty QR codes up there. We don't have those, but our website's pretty easy to access. You can sign up for our beta APIs, which are available now. They're going GA, I believe, next week, so you don't have to wait too long to use kind of the real thing. We're really excited about what we're rolling out. You can also check out our developer portal, which is a place where if you want to start building custom card integration, really anything, we have guides and tutorials and best practices all there for you to read and get started. We also have a thriving developer community where Klaviyo contributes as well, asking questions, exploring unique use cases, really getting at the edges of what's possible. So we're pretty excited about that. And lastly, you're all here. We do have a tech partner booth right on the other side of this curtain where some of my colleagues after the talk will be going back. They were part of this initiative. They're super jazzed. All they think about is how to make developers' lives easier day in and day out. So go chat with them, give us feedback on how we're doing, what you'd like to see, because we're really just at the beginning of kind of this larger exploration of how we can extend merchant value beyond what we can build within our own app walls. So with that, I'll hand it off to Sarah. I don't know if they intentionally put us together, but next she'll be talking about Alloy and how to integrate all the data, so it's a really nice segue, but really appreciate you all joining here today. Hopefully this was interesting, maybe a little inspiring. The last anecdote I'll say is that I wish we had started thinking more platform first a lot earlier. The sooner you get started, even if you're a small app, think about your internal APIs, make them external, just push yourself to do it. It's a lot easier to do early on. So that you're not finding yourselves, 7, 8, 9 years in, re-envisioning the future of your APIs and how you can better integrate into the ecosystem. So even if you're smaller, it's something that I highly recommend thinking about and planning for early, and save yourself some of the gripes later down the line. So thank you. I think we do have time if there's any questions. Happy to answer those. Any questions? It looks like we have one over here.
You mentioned internal API usage versus external API usage. I'm just wondering when you were tackling this problem, were you thinking about these APIs specifically for external consumer needs versus internal consumer needs, or were you focusing on dogfooding as well?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think it depends a little bit on the area of the platform, a mix of both. In some cases, we already had internal APIs and we needed to externalize them. In some cases, the service boundaries internally weren't really clear, so this was a really good opportunity to tighten those service boundaries, think about the interconnectedness internally, and then expose that. I think it's much easier if you do that first, have really clear service boundaries, think about internal APIs, and just plan to expose those primitives, right? It's kind of about leveraging your APIs to help do anything, and extend your own UI. So for us, it was a little bit of both, and I think it'll continue to be. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Just a question more about the Klaviyo API roadmap. Do you guys plan to introduce the support of Shopify meta fields into the API? I know it's very tag focused right now, but I was just wondering if that's on the roadmap.
Yeah, it's a good question. I have a clarifying question, though. So right now, we have Klaviyo attributes, and then we do sync Shopify tags and meta fields. Do you mean specifically accessing Shopify meta fields through Klaviyo? Yeah, so right now, Klaviyo and Shopify obviously are fairly tightly integrated. They're expanding some of their meta fields, and we're working closely with them on that. So I think you will start to see more interoperability between the two platforms, and we are working on our profiles APIs at the same time to expose more attributes from within Klaviyo in different shapes and forms via API. So both, but from different angles. Shopify obviously has their own excellent APIs to access those meta fields, but a lot of the data is syncing back and forth. Yeah. Other questions? Excellent. Well, I'll be around. Feel free to come find me or folks from my team. Always happy to chat all things Klaviyo, and appreciate your time.